Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Sylvia and I am here with the solved case that is the murder of a true Hollywood star who was a rising beauty and sex symbol of the 1980s. You may have been brought to my channel through my TikTok series, Celebrities Who Had Untimely Fates, and if you are, then welcome to my channel. And if you're a longtime subscriber, then an extra special welcome to you. I tried to kind of like dress with the theme of being like disco, 70s, but I didn't really have time to do my hair. Dorothy Stratten was born February 28, 1960 in Vancouver, Canada to Dutch immigrants. Her family had fled the Netherlands after World War II and they settled down in Canada where her father quickly left her life. You'll see that Dorothy barely knew her father and was raised basically by a single mother raising two children, Dorothy and her younger sister. Dorothy had the aesthetics of the typical Dutch woman: blonde hair, stunning blue eyes, and pale skin. But Dorothy was described as a very humble person. She didn't walk around like she was the hottest thing on earth, even though a lot of people said that if you met Dorothy, you were absolutely stunned by her beauty. In high school, she got a job at Dairy Queen to help her mom pay the bills. She was just 17 at this time, and this is when none other than Paul Snider walked into the Dairy Queen one day. The 26-year-old Paul Snider is immediately taken with 17-year-old Dorothy. The two began dating despite her being underage, and I think her being so young and naive is what made her appeal to Paul Snider. See, Paul Snider was really into having all these different side gigs, making money, being an entrepreneur, even though he didn't really have a business. And he had this reputation before he met Dorothy. Okay, I don't really know what to do if my ring light's going to be going out this whole time. Because I just moved, I don't know where my lights are. People described Paul Snider as kind of a skis, someone who was always looking to make a quick buck, what we'd call nowadays a hustler. He wanted to be an entrepreneur, but he wasn't very good at the business management part. But Dorothy thought Paul was really cool. He was described as a loser by those around him, and I feel like 25-year-olds who normally go after 17-year-olds are usually like that. But of course, Dorothy didn't notice this. She was described as being pretty naive. She'd never left their town, and she thought Paul was a really cool guy, and once they started dating, she was really into him. Paul Snider dressed in the very stereotypical 70s disco costume. He honestly looks like a Party City ad. Like the button down, like all the way down to here with like the hairy chest, and then a gold chain, then like a long fur coat. He honestly was just ridiculous. Like I get secondhand embarrassment just looking at him. Paul Snider mainly worked as a club promoter, but he wanted to get Dorothy into modeling so that he could be her agent. Dorothy was described as very sweet with a malleable mind, and Paul really took advantage of this. In 1979, Paul had the idea that Dorothy, being a gorgeous, voluptuous girl, he had the idea that he should take photos of her in lingerie. He thought that she could have a really successful career as a lingerie model, and he was right. But Dorothy, being 18 years old, she wasn't really comfortable with this. But Paul pressured her into taking the photos, and he sent them into Playboy. Playboy really liked these photos, and to Dorothy and Paul's delight, they wanted to publish them. But they actually had to get Dorothy's mom to sign off because she was legally underage in Canada. They also asked Dorothy if she'd like to visit the Playboy Mansion for a business trip, and her flight to Los Angeles was the first time she'd ever been on an airplane. Dorothy had the doe-eyed, wholesome personality that the Playboy brand really liked. Even though they were like a scandalous, sensual magazine, they liked their models to be kind of on the innocent side. Playboy was really into the girl next door stereotype, as in like, she's beautiful, but she doesn't really know it. She's kind of shy, and that really described who Dorothy was at the heart of her. So if you don't know about like the Playboy brand, they kind of have a lot of stuff going on. So there's the Playboy magazine that would have articles and nude photos of women as well as women in lingerie. And then there were Playboy clubs where the girls would work and their uniforms were these like black leotards with bunny ears. And then I think they might have had like a choker thing and then like little cuffs. It was kind of like a sexy tuxedo type of thing. And in addition to the Playboy Club, there was the Playboy Mansion where Hugh Hefner, along with several of the models, lived. Dorothy got a job working at the Playboy Club, and because she was so young, she couldn't legally serve alcohol. So she just worked as a greeter and would wave to people as they walked in. Dorothy's LA modeling career got off to a great start. In 1978, she was one of the finalists in the 25th anniversary Hunt for the Next Playmate. It was during this time in her modeling career that she also shortened her name to Dorothy Stratten just to make it a little bit easier. Playboy sponsored Dorothy to get a green card so that she could continue working in the US. And Paul did not have a sponsor. So even though he was acting as Dorothy's manager, he basically had to live off of her money because he couldn't legally work. Like I said, Paul was a wannabe entrepreneur and he would come up with all of these different ideas, most of which weren't very good. He came up with an idea that they thought was really interesting. It was a strip club, kind of like the Playboy Club, but instead it was men and they would be dancing for women. This idea turned into Chippendales. But Paul Snider started to bother everybody who was also in on this idea, so they eventually ousted him from the business, and he felt really wronged and screwed over by this. And I do feel like that sentiment is real. It was his idea. He should still be involved in the process, even if he's difficult to work with. There's a TV series on Hulu called, I think, Welcome to Chippendales. I haven't watched it, but I know that Dorothy is a character in it as well as Paul Snider. Paul Snider was really enjoying their LA life. He was coasting off of Dorothy's success and living the lifestyle that he'd always wanted. But the only problem was this was Dorothy's success, not Paul's. Sure, he submitted the original photos of her, but all of the modeling opportunities that she got afterwards were because of her. As Dorothy got more and more modeling opportunities through Playboy, this turned into a power struggle between Paul and the Playboy company. And Paul's way of dealing with this was to cement himself to his cash cow by proposing to Dorothy. He caught her right as she was starting to rise as a model, and by marrying her, he was able to get more control over her, both financially as well as emotionally. Paul was technically her agent, but Playboy obviously had much more experience in managing a model. They had all of the connections, they had the proper training. If she wanted to take classes, they could get her into acting, which they were really trying to push her to do. And Playboy was the one that was putting Dorothy on the path to stardom. And something that really concerned people was that Paul had a very strong hold over Dorothy. Even though Playboy was the company that was really pushing Dorothy to rise as a model, she still had a lot of trouble saying no to Paul, and he would try to sign her up for all of these like random appearances, like club appearances, these like cheap photo shoots. He just wanted to make a quick buck off of her, and she had a lot of problems saying no to him. Dorothy was featured in multiple centerfold shoots as well as cover shoots. Hugh Hefner also thought that Dorothy had the potential to become an actress, and this was something that she was interested in, so they started giving her acting classes. Playboy seemed to be the ceiling for a lot of their models, and not many of them were able to work into being either high fashion models or get into acting, but Dorothy seemed to have that potential, and Hugh Hefner really believed in her. There were dozens of Playboy models, but Dorothy stuck out as one of his favorites. He saw so much potential in her. He really thought that she could elevate the Playboy brand while also achieving great amounts of success for herself outside of Playboy. And I do want to cut in really fast. I know that there are a lot of problematic things about Playboy and Hugh Hefner's role with all of the different models. I know that it was a really toxic environment. The models, particularly the ones that lived in the house with him, would be pressured into doing stuff they didn't feel comfortable doing. But I feel like in most toxic environments, there are the favorites who don't experience any of that pressure. And then there are the employees that go through absolute hell. And I do think that Dorothy received the best parts of working for Playboy. People at Dorothy's shoots started to notice tensions between her and Paul. Paul was extremely pushy, and people would make efforts to keep him off of the set. But if he was off the set, then he would call Dorothy every hour. It wasn't like he was calling to say like, "Hey babe, how's things going?" Dorothy always seemed stressed after these calls. It almost seemed like he was trying to insert himself and continue to control her, even when she was in the hands of people who could treat her better. Hugh Hefner, along with all the other Playboy employees and models, felt that Paul was just kind of creepy and weird. They really didn't like his demeanor, and they felt like he showboated. In addition to Paul being controlling and pushy, he also was a bit of a creep. He was caught making out with another Playboy bunny at the mansion when Dorothy wasn't there, and security guards threw him out. And from that point on, Paul Snider was only welcome in the Playboy house if he was accompanying his wife. And as Dorothy's career started to grow, she really started to grow out of her own shyness. She started to realize that she was a force to be reckoned with in the entertainment industry, and she started saying no to Paul Snider more. But of course, Paul Snider would turn around and say that he was uncomfortable with what Dorothy was doing. He wanted to be on sets with her because she was going to be naked around other men. And yes, I understand how a romantic partner could be uncomfortable with the fact that their partner is posing naked and they're not there. But this is what Paul Snider wanted for her originally. He was the one who pushed her into all of this, and now that she was getting actual success and it needed him less, he didn't like it all of a sudden. The red flags were flying, and Dorothy just didn't really seem to notice. Paul's controlling behavior started getting to the point where professionally it was weighing Dorothy down. So, like I said, Dorothy wanted to get into acting, and she got cast as the title role in the movie Galaxina, which was about like an alien, beautiful woman, and Dorothy was playing Galaxina. But on the set of this movie, Paul Snider called her. Dorothy went into her dressing room for about 10 to 15 minutes and came out very visibly upset, like she'd definitely been crying. Dorothy's peers in the professional world were understandably getting really irritated with the situation. Not only was Paul just not helping, but at this point he was actually hurting. And then in 1980, Dorothy achieved one of the biggest milestones of her career. She was named Playmate of the Year. By being named Playboy's Playmate of the Year, Dorothy received a ton of gifts. She got a special commemorative photo shoot. She was going to be on the cover of the magazine. She did this really sensual nude shoot in a bathtub, and then she was gifted the bathtub. It could seat like 7 people and was valued at over $10,000. And also, as part of that, she received a Jaguar sports car, a fur coat, along with thousands of dollars. Part of this was also an awards show, so she got to kind of be celebrated for the night by everyone who knew her. And you can see in the footage that Dorothy is trying to keep Paul Snider at a distance. She just keeps kind of trying to avoid him, but he keeps like appearing in the back of photos. And you can also see that Hugh Hefner is being really irritated with Paul as well. Hugh Hefner hated Paul Snider, and he was begging Dorothy to just cut the cord. And infuriatingly, Paul takes it upon himself to sell some of Dorothy's gifts from Playboy for achieving Playmate of the Year just for like quick cash. Like he sold the bathtub and the Jaguar both for less than they were valued just so he could have some cash to burn. After getting Playmate of the Year, Dorothy then booked a Canadian tour where she would kind of do like meet and greets with her fans. So on this Canadian tour, Dorothy informs Paul that she is planning on filing for divorce. And during this tour, she blocked off a week in Vancouver so that she could spend it with her family. But adding to the disrespect that she received from Paul, he then, without asking her, booked her additional appearances during this week She was living in the United States, so she didn't get to see her family very often. And this was supposed to be a good 7 days for her to spend with them. But instead, she was having to work because she couldn't cancel these appearances last minute. Because her family was Dorothy's support system and Paul Snider had booked these events that she would have to attend, she wouldn't be able to strategize with them and how to get out of the relationship with Paul, and she wouldn't really be receiving their support. And in fact, they might not have even realized that the situation was as serious as it was. 1980 was a huge year for Dorothy. She got cast as the lead role in a movie called Then They All Laughed, and this was being filmed in New York City. It gave her the opportunity to divorce Paul and get some time away from him since he would be staying in LA and she would be moving to New York City to film. On set, Dorothy became close with the director Peter Bogdanovich. They began dating in secret, partially because they were both public figures and because of the situation with Paul. Hugh Hefner also really liked Peter Bogdanovich. He was much more on Dorothy's level. Everyone really respected him, everyone really liked him, and he was, of course, very encouraging of Dorothy professionally. Peter Bogdanovich was a much more classy Hollywood elite type person, and one of their friends actually described Peter as filet mignon and Paul as a hot dog on a stick. Meanwhile, Paul is staying at the home that they had rented out in LA. In a move that I'm sure was very embarrassing for him, he actually had to get roommates to help pay rent. And this whole time, he still thinks that he's going to get Dorothy back. But eventually, as he sees her moving on, he realizes that he's not going to get her back. When he realized that there was no way to force Dorothy to get back together with him, this is when Paul Snider started to plan. Because he wasn't a US citizen, he had to buy a gun on the black market. He also started talking to his roommates and friends about how Playboy reacts when one of the bunnies dies. There had been this Playboy model that had passed away in a car accident a few months earlier, and Playboy pulled her photos from that upcoming issue, just kind of like out of respect. And he told this story to some people, but unfortunately, no one really made the connection that he was planning something. On August 14th, 1980, Paul convinced Dorothy to drop by their LA home. He also told his roommates that she would be coming by and they should be out of the house. They were going through a divorce, so the roommates thought that this was just, we might get into an argument, it might be really awkward, we'd like some alone time to talk things out, and his roommates agreed to be out of the house. Dorothy's friends begged her not to meet up with Paul alone. Dorothy just didn't really see this evil, manipulative person that everyone else saw. She agreed to the meetup, but she also didn't tell anybody about her plans. I'm sure that Playboy would have given her a security guard or some kind of escort, but she went alone. A really tragic detail in all of this is that when Dorothy drove over there, in her purse, police found a security deposit that she had given Paul just so he would have some money after the divorce was filed. So it's so sad that she's considering his financial situation. Meanwhile, he doesn't even think she deserves to live. As the sun started to set on that hot August day, Paul's roommates returned and they saw Dorothy's purse sitting in the entryway. All the roommates lived on different floors, so it wasn't typical that they would say hi to each other when they walked in. They kind of all lived their own lives. But they did notice that the apartment was silent. And as Paul's phone started to ring and nobody was picking it up, they found this to be pretty odd that hours and hours had gone by and nobody was answering the ringing phone. And because Dorothy's purse was there, they knew that they were in the room. At 11 p.m., the two roommates looked outside and saw that Dorothy's car was still there. And this is when the female roommate convinced the male roommate to knock on the door to check on them. The roommate knocked but got no answer, and after that, he opened the door. The roommates uncovered an extremely bloody scene. First, they saw Paul naked and slumped over, and then they saw Dorothy towards the far wall. Both Dorothy and Paul were naked and covered with blood, and ants were crawling all over their bodies. They didn't understand what happened at first, but when the police arrived, they found a shotgun underneath Paul. Paul had chosen to shoot Dorothy point blank in the face before turning the shotgun on himself. And getting shot point blank with a shotgun is going to basically like blow the object apart. By shooting Dorothy point blank in the face with a shotgun, Paul had made it so that he was the last person to ever see her face. When responders arrived, she didn't really have a face anymore. The autopsy showed that Dorothy Stratten, who was just 20 years old at this time, she had been SA'd by her own husband, the one man who was supposed to love her and take care of her. And after this, she had been shot in the face and she was missing the tip of one of her fingers, meaning that she had put her hand up to try to guard herself from her attacker. She'd been killed around 1 p.m., about an hour after she'd arrived. And Paul Snider had likely SA'd her body post-mortem as well. And police theorized that based on the level of decomposition and the differences in that Paul had spent several hours trying to decide what to do before eventually turning the weapon on himself. Everyone who knew Dorothy was absolutely horrified to find that her life had been taken so violently and when she was just 20 years old. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it was just because he was more famous, but Hugh Hefner was informed of Dorothy Stratten's death first, and he personally made the call to Peter Bogdanovich to inform him about his girlfriend's passing. Peter was absolutely distraught, and he started having a panic attack and had to be sedated. It was too late to pull Dorothy's photos from print in the upcoming Playboy magazine, so they ran anyway. Everyone in Hollywood was absolutely gutted to hear about what happened to Dorothy, especially given the fact that she started to come up as a model when she was 17 and she was killed when she was 20. So much had happened over a 3-year period, and her meteoric rise was really positioning her to be a sex symbol of the era, like a Farrah Fawcett or Pamela Anderson. Peter Bogdanovich chose Dorothy's epitaph himself. It's an Ernest Hemingway quote, and it says, "If people bring so much courage to this world, the world has to kill them to break them. So of course it kills them. It kills the very good and the very gentle and the very brave impartially. If you are none of these, you can be sure it will kill you too, but there will be no special hurry. We love you, Dr." There are several movies and books that are made about Dorothy's rise to stardom as well as her passing, and Peter Bogdanovich actually writes one of these called The Killing of the Unicorn. This book is very spicy. Think Prince Harry's Spare, but in the 80s, and a lot of the heat was directed towards Hugh Hefner. In the book, Peter alleges that Hugh Hefner was having an affair with Dorothy, which he always vehemently denied, and I don't really believe this either. Dorothy seemed to be, despite the fact that she was a nude model, she didn't seem to be someone who would really participate in stuff like that. It wasn't until she was moving on from Paul that she started dating Peter, and even that was going from a serious relationship to another serious relationship. So I don't think that she would be sleeping with her boss. Hugh Hefner filed a defamation lawsuit against Peter Bogdanovich for the allegations made in his book. He also accused Peter of having inappropriate advances towards Dorothy's younger sister, and there's actually a lot of merit to this. So after Dorothy's passing, Peter lets Dorothy's mother and sister move into his mansion in Bel Air because that was kind of the plan for when they got married. But Peter did take a special interest in Louise. He paid for her to have plastic surgery so that she could look more like her older sister Dorothy, and he married her when she turned 20, the same age that Dorothy was when she died. So Peter and Louise were married from 1988 to 2001, and they still are on good terms and they still remained business partners. Peter Bogdanovich did pass fairly recently in January 2022. And that is the story of the 3-year rise and fall of Dorothy Stratten. It's really sad that her life was snuffed out so quickly because I do believe that had she been able to make even a bigger name for herself, she would be remembered as an icon of the times. I would have loved to see what she had to say about the modeling industry and about working with Hugh Hefner had she been able to age and mature. So many women have come out to say that he mistreated them, he would verbally abuse them. I think that if you lived in the Playboy Mansion with him, you like had to have sex with him. And I would love to hear her opinions on that. But unfortunately, Dorothy's voice was taken away from her. And I want to end the video by saying, despite the allegations against Playboy, Dorothy's death was the result of Paul Snider's insecurities and narcissism. It wasn't the fact that she was starting to embrace her sexuality. It wasn't the fact that she was posing for risque photos. Instead, it was his actions that led to her death, and it was his decision, and Dorothy, and anyone else for that matter, isn't to blame. All right, that's it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, let me know down in the comments, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Let me know what kinds of cases you guys like to hear, because I typically don't cover solved cases unless it's something that I found really interesting. But until next video, I hope you guys all have a wonderful rest of your day and stay safe.